The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone streets of Windsor, as 8-year-old Emma clutched her mother's hand tightly. They had traveled from their small village in Yorkshire specifically for this moment, to catch a glimpse of the royal family during their weekly public appearance. Emma's eyes sparkled with excitement as she wore her best blue dress, the one with tiny flowers that her grandmother had sewn for special occasions. The crowds were thicker than usual that Tuesday morning. Tourists and locals alike pressed against the ornate iron gates, their cameras ready to capture any movement from within the castle grounds. Emma's mother, Sarah, lifted her daughter onto her shoulders so she could see over the sea of heads. The little girl's laughter rang out as she spotted the red uniformed guard standing at attention, their tall black hats making them appear even more imposing. Guard Thomas Mitchell had been serving the royal family for 12 years. His sharp, blue eyes constantly scanned the crowd, trained to notice anything unusual or out of place. At 34, he had seen countless public gatherings, but something felt different about today. There was an energy in the air that made his instincts prickle with unease. He adjusted his position slightly, his hand instinctively moving closer to his radio. Emma waved enthusiastically at the guards, hoping one of them would wave back. Her innocent joy was infectious, and several people in the crowd smiled at her. Pure excitement. She had been talking about this trip for weeks, asking her mother countless questions about the Queen and the royal family. This was more than just a day out for Emma. It was a dream come true. As the morning progressed, the crowd grew larger and more restless. Children began to fidget, and adults checked their watches repeatedly. The royal appearance was scheduled for 11 o'clock, and it was now 10:30. Emma's mother noticed her daughter was getting tired from sitting on her shoulders and gently lowered her to the ground. Thomas continued his methodical observation of the crowd when his attention was drawn to a white van parked across the street. The vehicle had been there when he started his shift 3 hours earlier, but now he noticed the driver's behavior was odd. The man kept looking toward the crowd through his side mirror, and his hands appeared to be gripping the steering wheel tightly. Something about the situation made Thomas's years of training kick into high alert. The van's windows were tinted darker than normal, making it impossible to see inside clearly. Thomas made a mental note of the license plate and began moving closer to get a better view. His movement was subtle, professional, designed not to alarm anyone while positioning himself for a clearer assessment of the potential threat. Emma, now standing beside her mother, noticed a colorful balloon that had escaped from a child's grasp floating toward the van. Without thinking, she broke free from her mother's grip and ran toward the street, her small legs carrying her quickly through the gaps in the crowd. Her mother's voice called out behind her, panic rising in her tone as she realized what was happening. Thomas saw the little girl's movement in his peripheral vision. His training had taught him to track multiple situations simultaneously, and now his attention was split between the suspicious van and the child running directly toward potential danger. The balloon danced in the breeze, leading Emma closer to the street where the mysterious white vehicle waited. The driver of the van suddenly straightened in his seat, his attention now focused on the approaching child. Thomas felt his heartbeat quicken as he realized the gravity of the situation unfolding before him. Years of protecting the royal family had prepared him for many scenarios, but this moment required split-second decision-making that could determine the safety of an innocent child. Emma's small hand reached up toward the balloon as it floated, tantalizingly close to the van's front bumper. Her focus was entirely on retrieving the colorful prize, completely unaware of the adult world of danger and suspicion surrounding her. The morning that had started with such joy and anticipation was about to take a turn that no one in the crowd could have anticipated. Thomas moved with the swift precision that only years of royal protection training could provide. In 3 quick strides, he covered the distance between his post and the street, his polished boots clicking against the pavement. Emma was now just 2 feet from the van, her tiny fingers stretching toward the dancing balloon that seemed to mock her efforts to catch it. "Stop right there, little one," Thomas called out in a firm but gentle voice that commanded immediate attention. Emma froze mid-step, her head turning to look at the tall guard whose red uniform seemed to glow in the morning sunlight. Her eyes went wide with a mixture of awe and slight fear at being addressed by someone so official and important. The van's engine suddenly roared to life, breaking the relative quiet of the morning. Thomas's suspicions crystallized into certainty as he watched the driver's erratic behavior through the windshield. The man's face was partially obscured by a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, but Thomas could see perspiration beading on his forehead, despite the cool morning air. Sarah pushed through the crowd, her heart pounding with the terror that only a mother watching her child in potential danger could experience. She reached Emma just as Thomas positioned himself between the little girl and the van. His body language was protective yet calm, a human shield trained to face whatever threat might emerge. "Emma, come here right now," Sarah's voice carried, the authority of maternal concern mixed with relief. She scooped her daughter into her arms, but Thomas gestured for them to move further back from the vehicle. His radio crackled to life as he quietly called for backup, his voice steady and professional despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. The balloon finally drifted down, landing softly on the van's hood before rolling off onto the street, where it deflated slowly against the curb. Emma watched sadly as her colorful prize became just another piece of street litter, but her attention was quickly drawn to the guard who had intervened in her balloon chase. Thomas kept his eyes fixed on the van while speaking softly to Emma. "That was quite an adventure you were having with that balloon, wasn't it? But we need to stay safe, especially with all these people around today." His voice carried warmth despite the tension he felt building in his chest as he observed the van driver's increasingly agitated movements. Other guards had noticed Thomas's position and began moving subtly closer to provide support. Their movements were coordinated and professional, a well-oiled machine that had been trained to respond to threats without causing panic among civilians. The crowd remained largely unaware of the developing situation, still focused on the upcoming royal appearance. The van driver appeared to be making phone calls, his hand pressed against his ear as he spoke rapidly into his mobile device. Thomas could see the man's lips moving urgently, though the words were inaudible from this distance. Every few seconds the driver would glance toward the crowd, then back toward the castle gates, as if timing something important. Emma tugged at Thomas's red jacket, her curiosity overcoming her initial intimidation. "Are you really a guard for the Queen?" she whispered, her voice filled with the wonder that only a child could possess. Thomas smiled down at her, his professional demeanor softening for just a moment as he remembered why he loved protecting the royal family and the people who came to see them. "I am indeed, and right now I'm making sure you and your mum stay safe during your special visit," he replied, his eyes never leaving the suspicious vehicle. Sarah held Emma tighter, beginning to sense that something serious was happening, even though she couldn't identify exactly what the threat might be. The van's occupant suddenly opened his door and stepped partially out of the vehicle. Thomas's hand moved instinctively to his radio as he prepared to escalate the situation. The man was tall and thin, wearing dark clothing that seemed inappropriate for the warm morning. More concerning was the way he kept looking toward the crowd, while reaching into his jacket pocket. Backup units were now in position, though they maintained their distance to avoid alarming the public. Thomas knew that whatever was about to happen, he was the first line of defense for not only the royal family, but also for the hundreds of innocent people, including Emma and her mother, who had simply come to experience a moment of joy and pageantry on what should have been a perfect morning. The man from the van took another step into the street, and Thomas immediately recognized the signs of someone acting under extreme pressure. The stranger's movements were jerky and unpredictable, his eyes darting constantly between the crowd and something inside the van that Thomas couldn't yet see. Years of experience had taught Thomas to trust his instincts, and every fiber of his being was now screaming that danger was imminent. Emma noticed the tension in Thomas's posture and instinctively pressed closer to her mother. Children often possess an intuitive ability to sense when adults are worried, and Emma could feel the change in the atmosphere around them. The excitement of her royal visit was being replaced by a confusing mixture of fear and fascination as she watched the guard's intense focus. "Mum, why is the guard looking at that van so carefully?" Emma whispered, her small voice barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. Sarah followed her daughter's gaze, and for the first time noticed the white vehicle that had captured Thomas's attention. Something about the scene made her maternal instincts flare with warning signals she couldn't quite understand. Thomas spoke quietly into his radio, using coded language that wouldn't alarm nearby civilians. "Control, this is Mitchell. I have a potential situation developing at Sector 7, requesting immediate tactical assessment and possible intervention team." His voice remained calm and professional, but those trained to listen could hear the underlying urgency in his tone. The van driver pulled his phone out again, but this time he seemed to be texting rapidly rather than making calls. His fingers moved frantically across the screen, and Thomas could see sweat now clearly visible on the man's face despite the cool morning breeze. Whatever plan was in motion appeared to be reaching a critical moment. Other members of the crowd began to notice the unusual activity. Some people started pointing toward the van and whispering among themselves. A few tourists raised their cameras, thinking they might be witnessing some sort of security exercise or special protocol related to the royal appearance. The atmosphere began to shift from excitement to curiosity, mixed with underlying concern. Thomas made a crucial decision. He gently but firmly guided Sarah and Emma further back from the street, positioning them behind a stone pillar that would provide better protection. "I need you both to stay right here for a few minutes," he instructed, his voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "Don't move from this spot, no matter what happens." Sarah nodded, clutching Emma tightly as she began to understand that they were potentially in the middle of something far more serious than a routine security check. Her mind raced with possibilities, but she forced herself to remain calm for Emma's sake. The little girl was watching everything with wide eyes, her young mind trying to process why her fun day out had suddenly become so intense. The suspicious man suddenly slammed his van door shut and walked quickly around to the back of the vehicle. Thomas's radio crackled with updates from his colleagues who were monitoring the situation from multiple angles. The backup team was now in position, ready to respond to whatever threat might emerge from the mysterious white van. Through the van's rear windows, Thomas caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. There appeared to be several large objects in the back of the vehicle, covered with dark blankets or tarps. The shapes were irregular and bulky, and one of them seemed to be moving slightly. His training told him that this could be anything from stolen goods to something far more dangerous. Emma tugged at her mother's sleeve, pointing toward the castle gates where the royal guards were beginning to form their ceremonial lines. "Mum, look, I think the Queen is coming soon." Her excitement was returning despite the strange tension she could feel around her. The innocence of her joy provided a stark contrast to the potential danger that Thomas was working to neutralize. The man at the van's rear doors paused and looked directly at Thomas for the first time. Their eyes met across the street, and Thomas saw something in the stranger's expression that confirmed his worst fears. This wasn't a coincidence or a misunderstanding. Whatever was happening had been planned, and the timing was deliberately coordinated with the royal family's public appearance. Thomas's finger hovered over his radio button as he prepared to give the signal that would transform the peaceful morning into a full-scale security operation. Everything depended on the next few seconds and the safety of everyone present, especially the little girl who had unknowingly wandered into the center of what was becoming a very dangerous situation. The stranger's hands moved to the van's rear door handles with deliberate purpose, and Thomas knew he could wait no longer. "Control. Initiate Code Amber Protocol immediately. All units converge on Sector 7 now." His calm professional voice carried across the radio waves, setting in motion a carefully choreographed response that had been drilled countless times, but never used in a real situation like this. Within seconds, the peaceful morning atmosphere began to change subtly, but dramatically. Additional guards appeared from positions that most civilians hadn't even noticed, moving with practiced efficiency toward predetermined locations. Their movements were smooth and coordinated, designed to contain any threat while minimizing panic. Among the hundreds of innocent people gathered for the royal viewing, Emma watched in fascination as more red-uniformed guards seemed to materialize from nowhere. To her young mind, this looked like an exciting part of the royal ceremony, perhaps some special parade or demonstration she hadn't known to expect. She clapped her hands together quietly, thinking she was witnessing something magnificent and rare. Sarah, however, was beginning to understand the gravity of the situation, the way Thomas had positioned them behind the stone pillar. The sudden appearance of additional guards and the tense atmosphere all pointed to something far more serious than a routine security check. She held Emma closer, whispering gentle reassurances while her heart raced with maternal fear. The suspicious man suddenly froze as he noticed the converging security personnel. His hands remained on the door handles, but Thomas could see his entire body tense as he realized his actions were being closely monitored. For a moment, time seemed suspended as predator and protector assessed each other across the busy street. Thomas began moving slowly but purposefully toward the van, his training guiding every step. He maintained eye contact with the suspect while simultaneously monitoring the man's hands and body language for any sign of aggressive movement. Each step was calculated to close the distance while providing maximum reaction time if the situation escalated quickly. The crowd remained largely unaware of the drama unfolding in their midst. Most people were still focused on the castle gates, chatting excitedly about the upcoming royal appearance and taking photographs of the ceremonial preparations. The guards' professionalism ensured that their tactical movements appeared routine to untrained observers. "Stay calm, Emma," Sarah whispered to her daughter, though she was really trying to reassure herself. "The guard is just doing his job to keep everyone safe." Emma nodded solemnly, her trust in adults absolute and her faith in Thomas's authority complete. She had decided that Thomas was her personal protector, a real-life knight in a red uniform. The van's occupant suddenly looked up toward the castle, and Thomas followed his gaze to see the royal family's advanced security team beginning their final preparations. Whatever this man had planned was clearly timed to coincide with the royal appearance, making the threat even more serious and time-sensitive. Thomas's radio crackled with updates from the tactical team, now positioned around the perimeter. "Mitchell, we have eyes on the subject. Explosive detection unit is approaching from the south, medical team standing by. Civilian evacuation routes are secure." The professional coordination was flawless, but Thomas knew that success would ultimately depend on the next few crucial moments. The suspect's phone buzzed with what appeared to be a text message. He glanced down at the screen and his expression changed dramatically. Thomas saw fear replace determination in the man's eyes, followed quickly by what looked like desperation. This shift in demeanor was often more dangerous than initial aggression, as desperate people made unpredictable choices. Emma suddenly pointed toward the castle and shouted with excitement, "Look, Mom! There's the Queen." Her young voice carried clearly across the street, and both Thomas and the suspicious man turned instinctively toward the royal emergence. The timing couldn't have been more critical or more dangerous. The man's hands tightened on the door handles as he prepared to open the van's rear compartment. Thomas realized that whatever had been planned was about to happen, and he was the only thing standing between potential disaster and hundreds of innocent people, including the little girl whose balloon chase had accidentally revealed this threat. The next few seconds would determine whether this morning would be remembered as a joyful royal viewing or something far more tragic. Thomas made his decision in a split second that felt like an eternity. With the royal family now visible at the castle gates and the suspect's hands moving to open the van doors, he couldn't wait for backup to get into optimal position. He sprinted across the street with the explosive speed that his military training had ingrained in him, covering the distance in mere seconds. "Stop! Royal protection! Step away from the vehicle immediately!" Thomas's command voice boomed across the street, finally alerting the crowd that something serious was happening. The suspect's eyes went wide with panic as he saw the guard bearing down on him, and his hands fumbled with the door handles in his desperate haste. Emma screamed with excitement rather than fear, thinking she was witnessing the most amazing royal ceremony ever. "Mom, the guard is running. This is the best day ever." Her innocent joy provided a surreal soundtrack to the unfolding crisis as Thomas reached the van, just as the suspect managed to wrench one of the rear doors partially open. What Thomas saw inside the van stopped him cold for just a moment. Instead of explosives or weapons, he found himself staring at three young teenagers bound and gagged, their eyes wide with terror above strips of tape covering their mouths. The moving shapes he had glimpsed earlier weren't objects at all, but human beings who had been kidnapped and were being held against their will. The suspect immediately raised his hands in surrender, his face crumpling with relief rather than defiance. "Please, officer, you don't understand. I'm not the bad guy here. I was trying to save them." His words tumbled out in a desperate rush as backup officers surrounded the van. The man was clearly terrified, but not of being caught. He seemed afraid of something else entirely. Thomas quickly assessed the situation while maintaining his protective stance. The 3 teenagers in the van appeared to be unharmed but clearly traumatized. They were well-dressed and looked like they came from affluent families. One of them, a girl about 16 years old, had tears streaming down her face as she made muffled sounds behind her gag. "I'm Detective Mark Harrison with the Metropolitan Police," the suspect said, pulling out his identification with shaking hands. "These kids were taken from their families 3 days ago. I've been tracking their kidnappers and I intercepted them this morning. I was trying to get them to safety when I saw all the security around here." Thomas's radio crackled as his backup team reached the van. The explosive detection unit quickly confirmed that there were no bombs or weapons in the vehicle, only the 3 frightened teenagers, and some basic supplies. The morning's crisis was transforming into something entirely different from what anyone had expected. Sarah and Emma watched from their position behind the stone pillar as police officers and paramedics arrived on the scene. Emma was bouncing with excitement, convinced she had witnessed the most spectacular royal entertainment possible. "Mom, did you see how fast the guard ran? He's like a superhero," she exclaimed, completely unaware of the real drama that had just unfolded. Detective Harrison explained rapidly to Thomas and the other officers that he had been working undercover to track a kidnapping ring that had been operating across London. The 3 teenagers were the children of prominent business leaders who had been taken for ransom. Harrison had finally located them that morning and was attempting to bring them to safety when the royal security situation complicated everything. The teenagers were quickly freed from their restraints and given medical attention. Thomas learned that they were Sophie Matthews, age 16, whose father was a bank executive, James Wellington, 15, son of a technology company owner, and Maria Santos, 17, whose mother was a high-profile lawyer. All 3 had been missing for 72 hours, and their families had been frantically working with police to secure their release. Thomas looked back toward Emma and her mother, realizing that the little girl's innocent balloon chase had inadvertently helped solve a major crime. If Emma hadn't run toward the van, Thomas might never have noticed the suspicious behavior that led to discovering the kidnapped teenagers. Sometimes the most important moments in police work came from the most unexpected circumstances. The royal family's appearance continued as planned, with most of the crowd unaware of the dramatic rescue that had just taken place mere yards away from their celebration. The morning that had started with such simple joy for Emma and her mother had become something far more significant than anyone could have imagined. As the immediate crisis resolved and the kidnapped teenagers were safely transported to receive medical care and reunite with their families, Thomas found himself walking back toward Emma and Sarah. The little girl ran toward him with arms outstretched, her face glowing with admiration and excitement that only a child witnessing her hero could display. "That was amazing. You're the bravest guard in the whole world," Emma declared as she hugged Thomas around his legs. Sarah approached more cautiously, finally understanding the full magnitude of what had just occurred. Her daughter's simple desire to catch a balloon had inadvertently led to the rescue of 3 kidnapped children and the prevention of what could have been a much more tragic situation. Thomas knelt down to Emma's eye level, his stern professional demeanor melting into genuine warmth. "You know what, Emma? You helped save those young people today. If you hadn't chased that balloon, I might never have noticed something was wrong with that van. You're quite the little detective yourself." Emma's eyes widened with wonder at the thought that she had played a part in something so important. Detective Harrison approached the small group, still visibly shaken from his undercover ordeal, but immensely relieved that his mission had succeeded. He explained to Sarah and Thomas that he had been tracking the kidnapping ring for weeks, following leads across London, until he finally located where the teenagers were being held. His decision to intercept them that morning had been risky, but the alternative was allowing them to be moved to a location where they might never have been found. The three rescued teenagers, Sophie, James, and Maria, were already on their way to be reunited with their families who had been living in agonizing uncertainty for 3 days. The parents had received the joyful phone calls that their children were safe and would be home within hours. Detective Harrison's undercover work had not only saved 3 young lives, but it also provided crucial information that would help police capture the remaining members of the kidnapping operation. Emma listened with rapt attention as Detective Harrison explained in age-appropriate terms how important it was for police officers and royal guards to work together to keep people safe. She asked dozens of questions about being a detective and a guard, her young mind already imagining herself in such exciting and important roles when she grew up. Sarah thanked both Thomas and Detective Harrison repeatedly, overwhelmed by the realization of how close her family had come to being part of something dangerous without ever knowing it. The morning that had begun as a simple mother-daughter outing to see the royal family had transformed into a life-changing experience that would be remembered forever. As the royal ceremony continued in the background, Thomas received word that the teenagers were now safely with their families, and that Detective Harrison's information had led to the immediate arrest of 2 other suspects connected to the kidnapping ring. The operation that had seemed so threatening just hours earlier was now being hailed as a major victory for London's police force. Emma finally got to see the royal family during their public appearance, waving enthusiastically from her position behind the stone pillar that had protected her during the morning's excitement. The Queen, unaware of the drama that had unfolded just meters away, smiled and waved back at the enthusiastic little girl in the blue flowered dress. When the royal ceremony concluded and the crowds began to disperse, Thomas walked Emma and Sarah back toward the main street where they would catch their train back to Yorkshire. Emma chattered excitedly about everything she had witnessed, already planning to tell her grandmother about her adventure with the royal guard and the detective, and how she had helped rescue 3 teenagers. As they reached the train station, Thomas presented Emma with a small pin featuring the royal guard insignia, a memento that would remind her of this extraordinary day. "This is for the bravest little balloon detective I've ever met," he said with a smile. Emma clutched the pin tightly, declaring it her most precious possession. The train journey home was filled with Emma's excited recounting of every detail of their adventure. Sarah listened with a mixture of amazement and gratitude, knowing that they had witnessed something remarkable, and that her daughter's innocent curiosity had played a crucial role in a story that would make headlines in the evening news. The simple desire to catch a floating balloon had led to one of the most important days of their lives, and neither mother nor daughter would ever forget the morning when Emma's adventure helped bring 3 families back together.